The people, yeah, what they want.
All right. And Senator, your 4 minutes starts now.
Well, first, I just want to thank Bishop Barber, Reverend Theoharis, and Joy for hosting this. It is critically important that we have this conversation and elevate these issues at this level, so I thank you. 4 minutes, okay. So this is about morality. It's about what are morals. It is about what is right. What are the teachings of Christ and other leaders who teach us the importance of living a life that is not about ourselves, but about service to and for others. I think about so many issues that we work on and that I'm working on through that lens. For me, the point of the significance of all of this, and obviously I'm running for president, the goal is obviously, and I fully intend to win, but I tell people everywhere that for me, the measure of our success will more importantly be that at the end of this process, we are relevant. That we are relevant in the lives of other people. I was raised by parents who were active in the civil rights movement. I was raised in a community of folks who said that your purpose in life should be about service to others. I was raised by parents who spent full time marching and shouting about this thing called justice and fighting for equality and fighting for fairness. And so when I then put that also in the context of what is morally right, I often think of the parable of the Good Samaritan. Because what the teachings are there from the book of Luke it is about how do we define neighbor? Everyone knows, well, let us live as we, and treat our neighbor as we would want to be treated. But what I like about the parable of the Good Samaritan is about defining who is neighbor. Who is neighbor? And understanding neighbor is not about the person who shares your zip code. Neighbor is not about the person who lives next door and drives the same kind of car like you do, or the person who has kids at the same school you are. What we learn in that parable is neighbor is that person you are walking by who is homeless on the street. The neighbor is somebody, some child or young person who is a runaway and who is vulnerable or has been exposed to neglect or abuse. Neighbor is that refugee who arrives on our shores seeking the support of what should be the strong arms of our nation and an embrace, and not what we have seen from this administration was to flick them and say, go back to where you came from. Neighbor is about understanding and living in service of others, understanding that we are all each other's brothers and sisters. Seeing in each other a family member, a child, a friend, a mother, a father. And so when I talk about and think about then policy in that context, it is everything that I think about when I think about why I support Medicare for all. It is everything I talk about and think about when I say we need to lift up working families. It is everything that I think about when I say we need to pay teachers their value. We need to reform the criminal justice system. We need to help renters out. We need to see what is happening in our country and treat our fellow human being as we would our neighbor, as we would want for ourselves. And so that's how I think about the issues before us. And I thank you all, everyone here, for your service, for your leadership, for this being such a personal cause, which is to fight for the least among these and to give voice and to lift people up with all that they deserve around voice and around dignity. And so with that, I thank you.
All right. Okay, we're going to go right to the audience for the first question. Mashyla Buckmaster, where are you? Yep, Mashyla. Where? Oh, there you are.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Mashyla Buckmaster. I'm here with
Hold that mic right on up so we can hear you.
I'm here with my friend Anu Yadav from Los Angeles, who has experienced homelessness, a lack of health care, and joblessness. I'm from Grace Harbor, Washington. There you'll find a lot of millennials trying to survive in a county with few options. I know it because I've lived it myself. When I was homeless, I would sleep on friends' couches or dirty laundry piles, or if I had to sleep outside, I just wouldn't sleep. And you might be surprised by how many folks living there are young. We might not fit the image of millennials on TV, but we're a part of an entire generation that has been made poor and cannot even afford a place to live. My question is, what is your plan to secure to secure decent and affordable housing for all? How will you fix this country's broken infrastructure that is hurting and, yes, killing poor people like me?
Good question.
Thank you for your leadership and for your courage and for your strength. So let's talk about affordable housing. I'll start there. It's one of the biggest issues that we are talking the least about, and we have got to deal with it. In 99% of the counties in the United States, if you are a minimum wage worker working full-time, you cannot afford market rate for a one-bedroom apartment. That's the reality in America today. And so I am proposing what I call the Rent Relief Act. So for renters who are paying more than 30% of their income in rent plus utilities, they will receive a tax credit so that they can be able to get through the month paying rent. And here's how I feel about it. I also connected to the issue of what we need to do around equal pay. I connected to the issue of what we need to do to raise the minimum wage. When we talk about people in poverty, well, we know that the numbers are such that if you pay attention to federal minimum wage, which is $7.25 an hour, those are poverty wages. That's $15,000 a year. So I also support what we need to do, and I'm an advocate for it. I was actually marching with folks in Vegas a couple days ago, picketing McDonald's, about what we need to do to lift up the minimum wage to at least $15 an hour, but a livable wage for folks. So there is that piece. There's the rent piece. There's about livable wage. What we also need to do is understand that in America today, almost half of American families cannot afford a $400 unexpected expense. That could be the car breaks down. That could be a health bill you didn't see coming. $400 unexpected expense can topple the stability of that family. In America today, in 99% of the counties, minimum wage workers can't afford a one-bedroom apartment. In America last year, 12 million people took out a loan of on average $400 from the payday lender at an interest rate often in excess of 300%. These are the realities of America today. And I find it just so, I have long words and then I have curse words, and I'm not going to say those because this is a religious gathering, kind of. But let me say, you know what I find? I find it interesting that these supposed leaders here in Washington, D.C., and in particular this administration, they walk around peacocking about how, oh, the economy is great. The economy is great, they say. And then when you ask them, well, how so are you measuring the greatness of this economy of yours? They point to the stock market. Well, that's fine if you own stocks. Then we ask, well, how else? Do you have another measure for the greatness of this economy of yours? And they talk about the unemployment numbers. Well, yeah, people are working. They're working 2 and 3 jobs. And in our America, nobody should have to work more than one job to have a roof over their head and food on the table. And so when I look at this issue, I think of it through all of those lenses. You talked about infrastructure. Well, let's deal with that on the macro and then and how it relates to everyday living. So $400 unexpected expense can completely topple the stability of almost half of American families. You know how much it costs to buy 4 tires? Why do you need to buy those tires? Because the roads and bridges are falling apart and you have to keep driving over potholes to get to work every day. These issues are connected. These issues are connected, not to mention infrastructure. In the context of if we really have a meaningful dedication to infrastructure, that's about jobs. That's about an improved quality of life for working people who have to travel often 2 hours one way or another because they can't afford to live in the same place where they work. All of these issues are connected, not to mention what we need to talk about in terms of building up the infrastructure of this nation around water, around what we need to do around renewable energies, and again, what that will create in terms of jobs, but also what that will create in terms of a better standard of living and a healthy, not even healthier, healthy standard of living for folks who deserve to be able to drink clean water and breathe clean air. So I appreciate your point. And I will also tell you, I worked for years on homeless youth and that issue, in particular because in San Francisco we had so many, and a lot of who were LGBTQ and fled the places where they were growing up because they did not feel safe or welcome or supported there. And for years I worked on the issue that was about, giving folks and making sure that they had a safe place to live. And so I just want to say to you that I admire your courage and your strength. So thank you.
All right, Senator. Pastor Theoharis.
Great. So I want to kind of continue in the conversation about poverty. There's 140 million people who are poor or low income in this country. Poverty is criminalized. It's perfectly legal to be homeless, but it's illegal if you move into a house and you can't pay the rent. And this is connected to the fact that our country also spends 53 cents of every discretionary dollar on the military and on militarizing our communities here at home. What do you have to say about both the problem of militarization of our communities and militarism abroad, and the lie that we can't do better, the lie of scarcity, the lie that people are to blame for their poverty, the lie that we should just fight each other over crumbs instead of having the whole pie?
Right, and the idea being that it's a zero-sum game. I couldn't agree with you more. Well, on the issue of militarization of police, I have a long-standing record of saying we need to demilitarize police, and we really need to get to a point where communities, frankly, don't need a law enforcement response to what's happening in their communities, because they are safe communities. And how do you achieve safe communities? One of the smartest ways to do that is to help communities have resources so that people can have jobs and can have the kind of support that they need to be able to do what they naturally want to do, which is raise their children and live a good quality of life. There's a saying, it's actually Father Boyle in Los Angeles, and he says, nothing stops a bullet like a job. Right? And so I am a big believer in that approach. In terms of what we need to do to also understand that we are criminalizing poverty, I'd bring up an associated point, which is the issue of money bail. So I actually have been a leader in the United States Senate on this issue, which is the cash money bail system in our country. I believe is about it's not only a criminal justice issue, it's an economic justice issue. Because what ends up happening is that people are charged with a crime and they sit in jail for days, weeks, even months and years waiting to go to trial simply because they cannot afford the bail to get out. So the person who has money in their back pocket for the same charged offense is walking free, and the person who does not is sitting in jail. And let's talk about exactly how that plays out in real life. Let's say a woman is picked up for shoplifting, something of great value, so it's considered grand theft. She gets arrested, she gets charged, she shows up in bail, and the judge says, well, your bail is $10,000, which is the average bail in the United States. Well, her family's sitting in the courtroom, right? She doesn't have $10,000 in her pocket. Her family's sitting in the courtroom thinking, we got to get Auntie out. So where do they then go? They go across the street to what is across the street from every courthouse in America, the bail bondsman. The bail bondsman says, I'll help you out, but you have to give me 10%, which you will not get back. That's the fee for me putting up the $10,000. Well, that's $1,000. The average American doesn't have $1,000 sitting around. So then that family has a couple of choices. They can beg, borrow, and steal to come up with that $1,000. Or let's say she's got young children at home and she's a single parent, knowing that if she does not get home, Child Protective Services will come and take her children, right? Or maybe there's a job that she is missing every day that she's sitting in jail, and she relies on that job to pay her rent. So what do you think she might do? It is very likely when the public defender comes to her and says, if you plead guilty, you'll get credit for time served and you can get out, that even if she has a defensible case, weighing the options, she is very likely to plead guilty and then have a felony record, all because she did not have the money to get out. And so what I'm proposing is we reform the criminal justice system around a number of things, but including this issue, which is squarely an economic justice issue as much as it's a criminal justice issue.
Can I ask you a quickly related question, just as a follow-up? Because we know now the other way in which the criminal justice system is being employed in a public policy way, in a very negative way, is with immigrants. And you're obviously from the state of California, where there's immigration is a top-of-mind issue. We're now seeing the mass incarceration of children, including children who are being taken away from their parents by our government. And for the most part, the people who are being attacked in this way are poor. They're either poor people who are coming here seeking refuge, but even just in general, the criminal justice system does target the poor. What could a president do? I mean, obviously, besides reversing a policy like that, but can you talk about the intersection of the criminal justice system and poverty and immigration?
Yeah, definitely. And it's, you know, look, we have babies sitting in cages because of the policies of this administration. They had talk about morality. A policy that is about separating children from their families. We all probably read recently that toddler, right? In the name of border security, when in fact what it is a human rights abuse being committed by the United States government. And so let's also look at the issue in the context of profit. Because you know what's happening, and especially with this administration. These for-profit private detention facilities, and then also all the money that's getting doled out to private prisons. And let's be clear about the business model, shall we? The business model is for certain human beings to make money off the incarceration of other human beings. So as president, one of the first acts of business for me would be to get rid of these private detention centers and private prisons. Because we've got to take the profit margin out of the issue.
Sure.
Yes. No, I don't want to get in stand in the way of the bishop talking.
That was actually an accident. I just blew it. I wouldn't dare interrupt the senator. Surely not a prosecutor. I mean, I'm crazy, but I'm not that crazy. But if it's okay, that was unintentional.
Please.
So I want to make a statement. It's a two-part question. Maybe Joe will let me get both parts in. I think that we need some political repentance. That Republicans need to repent for calling themselves Republican because they're not acting like their founder, Abraham Lincoln or Theodore Roosevelt. And Democrats need to repent for the fact that many times they have had power over the last 50 years and they walked away from talking about voting rights and poverty as a central issue. And they bought in to this neoliberalism and trying to be Republican light rather than being stateswomen and statesmen. And what that does is it creates the context for a charlatan to exist. Because if you're not your true self, a charlatan can fool people, right? And so Nell Painter says what we see in Trump, for instance, is the iconography of a too often repeated American reality. We take a few steps forward toward justice and we go way back. And we can't just blame it on Trump because prior to Trump, this is the first question I want to get at, prior to him, let me do it this way, Joy. All the women in here, raise your hand. All the women. Okay. All the men. All the people that they say on your birth certificate you're Caucasian or white. All the people they say you're black, native, Asian, mixture. Okay. All the millennials. All the people from across this land, every state, almost every state, raise your hand. You know what, we figured out something, Senator, and I want to ask you about it. Before Trump, 2010, 26 states passed voter suppression laws. That's 54% of all people of color, 52 senators, over 51% of the United States Congress and State House, 2010, before Shelby. After Shelby, they went on steroids, particularly across the South. We know that, for instance, Liz is from Wisconsin. Trump wins Wisconsin by 30,000 votes, but we know 250,000 votes were suppressed. He wins in some states like North Carolina, but there were 158 early voting places pulled. We saw what happened with Stacey Abrams. Voter suppression, not the lack of candidacy, is what kept her out of the governor's office. We figured it out in this room. We figured it out. It's all white, black. We figured it out that racialized voter suppression and gerrymandering is not just a black issue. We figured out, and written it up empirically, that the same people that use racialized voter suppression to get elected, once they get elected, they are stalwart against health care, living wages, union rights, LGBT rights, women's rights, funding public education. And strangely, this is a strange dynamic, they use race and racialized voter suppression to get elected. Once they get the power, they use the power to hurt most of the white people. So we figured it out, that if we're really going to transform America, I don't care what the pollers say, you know, because I know all campaigns get these pollers, and they say, well, this is the top issue, this is the top issue. We figured out if the candidates do not raise a real conversation in this country about how racialized voter suppression and gerrymandering is hurting all of us and undermining many of the agenda items that 80% of Americans want, but we can't get it because of the way these legislatures are being unconstitutionally constituted. Here's the question. Do you see that? And how is your campaign going to help in elevating the issue of racialized voter suppression, racialized gerrymandering, as not just a black issue or something that you talk about in front of the NAACP, right, but you talk about it to all America and let all America know it's all our problem?
That's right, that's right. And just to add to your point, so I talked about my bail reform bill. It was one of the first bills when I got to the United States Senate about 2 years ago. And I knew it was a nonpartisan issue, to your point, Bishop Barber. So I started knocking on some doors, and I ended up knocking on the door of a Republican by the name of Rand Paul. And I said, hey, I've got this bill, and I know you've shown some interest in the past on criminal justice work. I'd like to talk to you about it. He said, well, talk to me about the issue. What is it? I explained it to him similar to how I explained it just a few minutes ago. He said, okay, I'll sign up. I'll co-sponsor that bill with you. So then we did an op-ed in one of the major newspapers. And it got published, and it was like, I think on a Thursday or a Friday, and I went back to California. I'm sure he went back to Kentucky. And then I'm thinking, you know, I better check on old boy and see if he's still good with this, right? Because now this thing went out all over the place. And I better check and see, are his people okay with him, you know? And so I got in touch with him. I said, Rand, how you doing? How are you people responding to our op-ed and the issue? And he said, Kamala, Appalachia loves this. Because, to your point, Bishop Barber, we have so much more in common than what separates us. And certainly poor people have so much more in common than what separates them. Mm-hmm. And so how I intend to deal with it on our campaign is the way that I've been dealing with it, frankly, throughout my career, which is to be very clear that that mother who is in a rural part of Kentucky and that mother who is in Compton, California, when they wake up in the middle of the night with the thought that's been weighing on them, they have the same thoughts. When they're sitting trying to run to the emergency room with that baby who has a fever that is out of control, they are experiencing the same thing when they know they cannot afford that doctor's visit. If they have health insurance because they are among the working poor, but that deductible is $5,000. On the issue specifically of voting rights, it's exactly right, because this gerrymandering, what has happened since Shelby v. Holder in 2013, is all up and down the country, because it's not just in the South. Right. We've seen it in the Dakotas where students and Native Americans have all been suppressed. And what ends up happening is the people who win those elections vote against the interest of the folks they represent, in particular poor people. And
let me just say why, and then I want to ask the follow-up, is how you're going to go south, how your campaign is working to build coalitions between white, blacks, and Latinos and in the South. And the reason I keep pushing the South is we got people here from Hawaii and Washington State and Kansas, but they understand something. If you control 13 former Confederate states, you control 170 electoral votes. That's nowhere else in the country.
That's right.
If you control them, you control 31% of the House of Representatives, 26 members of the United States Senate, And the only way you can control them now, since 40% of the electorate is black people and you got progressive whites and Latinos, which means many of those states are not red, they're unorganized.
Yeah.
So the only way you can control them is through voter suppression and racialized gerrymandering. We have figured out that if we, as Americans, we have to put that in front of America's face. Do you want the Sun Belt, the Southern Sun Belt, to have this kind of control under the guise of voter integrity, when it's nothing but voter suppression, which then allows them to have the kind of control to block all these other issues. So we're challenging candidates to go south and build these cross-racial coalitions. Do you believe that's necessary?
Absolutely.
And how will your candidates be doing that?
Absolutely, and in fact, just a few days ago, I was in Alabama, talking with folks about a number of issues, including climate change. Because there are folks in Alabama who've got sewage in their backyards. And I mean, to be explicit, that sewage doesn't know the difference between a white and a black person or a Republican and a Democrat. And so, yes, absolutely. And I believe that, I have always believed, frankly, you know how like congressional delegations go, all these congressional delegations, they go all over the world, they take a bunch of members of Congress. I believe that there should be very well-planned congressional delegations to Appalachia, because the media has skewed the face of poverty in America. And the reality is poverty in America impacts everybody. I don't need to tell you what you already know. At least 40% of the people in poverty in America are white. And so the fact that some would then try and do, and remember for years, the welfare queen and the this and the that was always all about racializing poverty. And we have to continue to aggressively work against that stuff.
And will you go to the networks and say, we need to have at least one debate, live televised, that connects systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy on live TV for all of America?
I love that. Yes, yes. That would be fantastic. That would be fantastic.
Senator Kamala Harris, that brings us to the end of your time. And you know what else? That brings us to the end of the forum. So I want to thank you so much for being here. Wait, you get some walk-off music, though.
Thank you.
We ticked it. Where's the DJ? Come on, DJ. Thank you so much for being here.